The radical right is organized, and Ann Nelson, author Ann Nelson, with her new book Shadow Network, takes us into that shadow network. Check it out, leave your comments, dig the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We are going to spend this entire hour, something that we have done occasionally over the years for really, truly extraordinary efforts. Ann Nelson has written an extraordinary book. Our conversation is a great minds conversation here for this hour. The book is called Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Ann Nelson is a journalist, an adjunct professor of international public affairs, an adjunct research scholar at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. She's also a fellow Project Censored Award winner for her reporting work back in El Salvador. I've gotten 4 of those Project Censored Awards, and Ann is also a winner. Ann-Nelson.com, spelled just like I say, ANNE-Nelson.com is her website, and ANELSONA is her Twitter handle. Ann, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for writing this book. I'm really glad you could be with us.
Yes, my pleasure.
So, let's start at the beginning. In fact, I'd like to start prior to the beginning. Back when you were in your 20s, you were a reporter in Central America, and you saw the influence of the American right and the Central American right. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that informed your worldview and perhaps led you to write this book, if it did?
Oh, well, yes, I was in my 20s. So I was lacking in experience, but I was a witness to war crimes. And I was witnessing the fact that the Reagan administration was supporting death squads in El Salvador and Contras in Nicaragua that were murdering entire villages. In Nicaragua, I went and saw the results of a Contra attack on a daycare center where children were killed in a village called Fantasma. So it obviously made a very deep impression on me. And when I came back to the United States, as again, a 20-something-year-old reporter, I just thought, my country can't possibly be supporting these things. This is not who we are. And then I found out that there were all of these subterranean groups that were filtering money and support and governmental lobbying for the death squads. And for Roberto D'Aubuisson, who had planned the assassination of Archbishop Romero in El Salvador. Since then, Romero has been named a saint by the Catholic Church. So it was a real education by fire.
So to what extent are the people who were advocating covert American support, and I suspect some of it was overt as well, it certainly was hitting the news occasionally, but particularly the covert American support for right-wing death squads and to overthrow more left-wing governments in Central America. This was in the 80s during the Reagan administration. The CPN started in 81, if I'm recalling from your book. Is there an overlap between those folks, and if so, why and how?
Absolutely. You had a bunch of extremely conservative Republicans. I mean, we're talking about the radical right. And the Council for National Policy started in 1981, and they were going to be a real foothold for the aggressive foreign policy that was going to be extended, where it looked at every shadow in the corner as a communist plot. And that included church people. It included Catholic priests and nuns, including the American nuns who were murdered in El Salvador. And at the time, I was not aware of how all the mechanics worked. So what you had with the Council for National Policy in 1981 already was a director named Woody Jenkins, who had been a politician from Louisiana. He got involved with a group called Friends of the Americas. They were funneling money and support to the Contras and other people in the violent right wing of Central America. They got caught up in the Iran-Contra scandal. Oliver North, some of us may remember that name from the past, was a figure that was involved with this group from the beginning and still is. So they were there, but it kind of took me 20 years to unravel all of the schemes of what I was observing on the ground in those days.
I think most Americans have never heard of the of CPN, the Council for Policy Network?
Council for National Policy.
Council for National Policy, thank you, CNP. And see, this is how, I mean, and I've written about this stuff. I haven't written about CNP specifically, but, you know, I consider myself fairly well informed. And a lot of what I read in your book was new to me. You know, I knew all about Paul Weyrich, and, I knew who these guys were, but they've done an extraordinarily good job of flying below the radar. Lay out for us exactly what the Council for National Policy is, how they started, who started it, and who's running it now. This is not a large organization. As I recall, you wrote in your book there were 400 members at the moment, more or less?
Well, at any given time, when we can get access to their membership list, it's around 400, between 400 and 500 people. But a lot of people move in and out, and they appear to have members who are listed in their newsletter who aren't listed in their membership roster. So they've kept all of this hidden. And I want to say there's a good reason you can't remember the name. I'm convinced that they chose the most forgettable name they could identify. So the Council for National Policy. I was researching this sucker for a year before I could make the name stick in my mind. That is how intentionally obscure they are. Now, for those of you who know anything about nonprofit organizations, they're a 501c3, or by the IRS's standards, a charity. So they're supposed to be for nonpartisan, educational, and charitable use. They're a political organization. They're as partisan as it comes. And I have no idea how the IRS has overlooked its activities all of these years and not held them to account. Their executive director, Bob McEwen, at a recent meeting, described them as a consortium of givers. So what they do is they pull together people who can write big checks for political purposes, the major donors, and these have included a lot of people from the fossil fuel world, and the DeVos family of Michigan, whom you might be familiar with. Foster Friess is another one. There are some investment bankers in the picture. And they fund strategists who create messaging and campaigns. And they place these campaigns on their media partners. And the media partners help to organize their so-called grassroots organizations. So these groups, which include the National Rifle Association, the Anti-Abortion Susan B. Anthony list, and many, many others, present themselves to the professional media as expressions of the people. Well, they're not. They're top-down creations that are paid for and organized and strategized and messaged by this machine. So you have the pieces of this machine coming to light on the front pages and the individuals connected with it on almost a daily basis. But it has been very difficult to peek behind the curtain and see how the gears turn. In terms of who organized it, it was people who were frustrated by the failure of the Barry Goldwater campaign back in the day. And as you mentioned, Paul Weyrich was one of them, and his masterstroke was to co-found the Council for National Policy, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is all about manufacturing laws on a state level, and the Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank which crafts policies and then pushes them out into their network. Paul Weyrich was involved with the creation of all three of those, and they were supposed to work together from the beginning, and they have. The other two
extraordinary stuff. I think we're hitting a break here right now. Forgive my interrupting you, Ann, but I'm pretty sure we're in a break. We'll be right back with Ann Nelson. Her new book is Shadow Network. You got to check this out.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Shadow Network, media, money, and the secret hub of the radical right. Was the original idea that Weyrich and these guys, when they put this thing together, to simply pull together a bunch of rich folks and take over American politics? I mean, was it that simple? Or am I missing something here?
No, because money is not enough by itself. And that was the big lesson they took from the Democrats. there's this moment of this epiphany that they had when they looked at Democrats from the civil rights movement and the fair housing people and the feminists getting together and saying, oh, how do we collaborate? And they said, oh, the right doesn't do that. So they pulled this group together with a master plan. And the master plan was pretty much to take over the culture and to take over the country. I mean, and Weyrich oversaw a memorandum that stated this in so many words. It was, we have to wage guerrilla warfare on the culture and install right-wing values. We have to overcome the universities and the institutions of knowledge, and we have to basically undermine the federal government, its agencies, and its programs. So he needed partners for this. And Richard Viguerie, who more or less invented direct mail for political purposes, was his partner, and then Morton Blackwell, who designed a lot of training programs and recruitment programs for national candidates and campaign managers. The three of them were really the godfathers of this organization.
It sounds an awful lot like the Powell memo, which was written in 1971. Lewis Powell, you know, the tobacco industry lawyer that Richard Nixon put on the Supreme Court the next year, you know, wrote this memo to Eugene Sindor Jr., the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, laying out, you know, we've got to take over the schools, we've got to take over the courts, we've got to take over the media, we've got to create think tanks, all that kind of stuff. How much overlap is there between these two organizations?
Well,
or between the Powell memo and the creation of CNP?
Exactly. I haven't seen that the Powell memo led to an organization per se, but the thinking is very, very resonant, and I think that there was absolutely mutual influence. And I think that there were these groups in Washington and beyond that were all on the same page looking at how to work together. So you look at these organizations, for example, recently with the whole confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, people say, oh, well, the Federalist Society was involved in promoting her. And, oh, there's this thing called the Judicial Crisis Network that has paid for all of these ads. Well, they're all tied together. It's the same donors. It's the same founders. And they appear in the media as separate voices, but they're singing in tune.
It's pretty remarkable. There's a lot of coverage right now about Leonard Leo and his organization getting $80 million in dark money that they've spent to put, these three judges on the court. Well, we'll pick up this conversation on the other side of this break. I've got to read a commercial here on the commercial side of our program, so we'll be back in about a minute and a half. Ann Nelson is with us. Shadow Network is her book, Media Money and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Stick around. Welcome back. We're talking with Ann Nelson. She's the author of a brilliant new book, Shadow Network, Media Money and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. And Ann, we were just talking about how this, there's so much attention been paid to the Powell memo in 1971 over the years, but almost nobody has been paying attention to the Council for National Policy, which Paul Weyrich and these other folks started back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan administration. And you were talking about how the Federalist Society and the Judicial Crisis Network, which have funneled tens of millions of dollars of money where we have no idea who the donors were, into massive television advertising campaigns and massive campaign contributions, apparently, to Republican members of the Senate to get Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh and now Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. To what extent are organizations like the Federalist Society, the Judicial Crisis Network, aligned with the Council for National Policy or subordinate to or subsets of the CNP?
Leonard Leo, who was until very recently the head of the operating vice president of the Federalist Society, has been a long-term leading member of the Council for National Policy. So he's been in this strain of right-wing Catholics who have been promoting their agenda and using the Council for National Policy for their networking. In 2005, he and several other people involved with the Council for National Policy, including Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, right, and Ed Meese, whom we remember from the Reagan administration, along with C. Boyden Gray, co-founded what became the Judicial Crisis Network, right, 2005. The head of the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, is now on the executive committee of the Council for National Policy. So it's absolutely interwoven, and as I said, they promote themselves as being separate voices, but they're working in absolute coordination. And not only that, the secret to their success, I believe, is their ability to execute long-term strategies. So, for example, the Judicial Crisis Network, which has renamed itself as the Concord Fund, purchased the domain name of Confirm Barrett, right, for Amy Coney Barrett, in November 2017.
Whoa.
3 years ago.
So this is serious long-term planning. They've done the same thing for a few other federal judges, right?
Oh, absolutely. They've had their own pipeline, which runs straight through the Federalist Society, where they select and groom these individuals, and they promote them not based on their qualifications as judges, I'm afraid, because you look at Merrick Garland and his qualifications versus Amy Coney Barrett's, and there's no comparison. I mean, just in terms of their careers, their education, their achievements, it's really a pipeline that rests on ideology. And as an American citizen, it breaks my heart because the politicization of the judiciary is really a danger to our democracy.
Right, and she'd only been a judge for 3 years, and the only reason she was a judge was because when President Obama nominated a highly qualified African-American woman for a position in the Seventh Circuit Court, Mitch McConnell refused to process that application, that nomination in the Senate for a year, and as a result, that seat was left open, and as soon as Trump came in, McConnell put Amy Coney Barrett in that seat to set her up for this. One of the big questions that I kind of struggled with through this, or I just do in general, is the question of why. You mentioned in your book, you talk about John Calvin, and Calvin, the Protestant church back in the day was struggling with the question, if we're all evil because we're all born of women and Eve ate the apple, and all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Then how do we figure out who the good people are who can lead us? How do we come up with leaders? And Calvin's answer, or at least the answer of his followers to that question was, well, God has told us who he loves. This was all preordained before the creation of the world. And we can see that in the visible evidence of God's blessings, that is, they are rich. I mean, is it that simple that these people are neo-Calvinists and they actually believe that rich equals good and good equals an obligation or a need to rule?
I think it is for some of them. And I would point to the DeVos and the Prince families because they come from a branch. They are literal they're right-wing fringe Calvinists. So the idea is that God rewards the worthy with prosperity, and he punishes the unworthy who are going to hell anyway by making them poor. And of course, this kind of misses out on a lot of what goes on in human history and society. But if you subscribe to those values, I suppose you can take a winner-take-all attitude and say, we deserve to have the entire pie, because those are the rules they play by.
Some years ago, I've been doing this show for 17 years, and probably a decade or maybe even a little more than that ago, every year there's an annual convention in New York City that's put on by Michael Harrison and Talkers Magazine. It's sort of the official trade publication of the talk radio industry. And they have a lunch, a luncheon with a guest speaker and all that kind of stuff. And I found myself sitting next to one of the senior executives at Salem Radio Networks. And, we were talking radio, and I said, have you ever thought about putting a progressive on any of your stations? Because they've got, stations in pretty much all the major cities around the country. And he was like, oh, no, we would never do that. We're a Christian company. We were started as a Bible publishing company, and we still publish Bibles, and we would not put anybody on the air who's not a Christian. And I said, well, I'm a Christian, openly. And he said, oh, no, you can't be a liberal and be a Christian, a true Christian. And then changed the subject, or words to that effect. It's been some years. I don't remember the exact word for word, but it was damn close to that. And I've kind of always scratched my head about that conversation and about, what that was all about. And then in your book, I read that Salem is part of the Council for National Policy, or affiliated with them, or somehow associated with them. Tell us about their media strategy, please.
So, yes, Salem is a key partner for the Council for National Policy, and it's played, I believe, an important but largely hidden role in bringing Trump to power. The two founders and CEOs of Salem have been, one of them has been the president of the Council for National Policy in the past, and the other has been a leading figure there. So the way it works is the Council for National Policy will have people who are strategists, say people like Wayrick and Viguerie in the past, and other strategists moving into the present time, and they'll figure out what messages they're going to promote. Some of these are long-range messages, such as what they do on abortion. Democrats believe in abortion on demand up until the day of birth. Not true. Not true in the least, but it is the slogan that they've gotten mileage with, so they repeat it endlessly across their media platforms. And some people believe it. So that gets drummed in. They'll also have reactive messaging about day-to-day events. So, for example, during Black Lives Matter, the cities of the United States are living in a state of anarchy. You have to elect Trump in order to respond to it and have a peaceful life in your suburbs. But that message might change week to week. So Salem Media is fascinating. It's the biggest media organization you've never heard of for most people. And they distribute content to something like 3,000 radio stations across the country. A lot of my colleagues on the East Coast don't understand how powerful radio is in much of the country. But you get these stations, some of which are religious, some of which are what are called Christian contemporary music, some of them are right-wing talk, and they just broadcast this messaging across their platforms. There are other radio partners, the BOT network, which is mostly in the Southwest, the American Family Radio Network, which is hugely homophobic and Islamophobic and virulent, and that's based in Tupelo, Mississippi, with over 100 stations. So they are all pumping out this uniform messaging to their audiences. Now, Salem has gone and multiplied its platforms. So it has outlets like the Daily Caller, which is an online platform for which Ginny Thomas, Mrs. Clarence Thomas, is a so-called correspondent. She's also a member of the Council for National Policy. So you have this kind of wraparound media effect going online, on radio, on Christian Broadcasting Network television, and many other outlets, so that people inside this media bubble may have no other idea of reality.
It's extraordinary. To what extent is Fox News and Cumulus and what used to be called Clear Channels, now iHeartRadio, are the other, those are the two, I believe, largest radio networks in the country. And then Fox News, of course, with billionaire Rupert Murdoch, are they associated with the Council for National Policy?
So I've dug around in this. It's not entirely conclusive. But you have figures like Todd Starnes, who's been a member of the Council for National Policy. He's also been on Fox News. He has a very checkered history as a journalist. You have proxies, such as this duo called Diamond and Silk, who are favorites. They're supposed to be soliciting the African-American voter for Trump. And they're connected. They can appear on Fox sometimes and not other times. But I don't think there's a direct correlation, and I don't see a direct correlation with the other companies you mentioned either. However, I do think that by the time you look at, go to the Salem Media website and look at their list of properties. And they include Regnery Publishing, which is the biggest right-wing book publishing house in the country, as well as feature film productions, music production, and many online outlets such as PJ Media, etc. And once you pump these into social media, you really get traction.
Yeah, it becomes a massive echo chamber of organizations that appear to be disparate, but in fact are all intertwined. I was surprised to see Kellyanne Conway's name on this. Her husband, George, just tweeted that Anonymous, you know, the guy who wrote that op-ed a couple of years ago in the New York Times saying, we're holding back Donald Trump, don't worry, we're inside the administration, that he or she is going to be coming out soon, and I retweeted that with words to the effect of poop meat fan, you know, it's something big is about to happen. But Kellyanne Conway, his wife, in the Council for National Policy? She's not a billionaire.
No, there are many people who are not billionaires in the group. They have different functions. So she was in the 2014 directory, which was published by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And for years, that was the only roster that researchers like me had access to. Now, there's been a treasure trove of internal documents that have been accessed and published. And I refer people to the Center for Media and Democracy, which has published a whole bunch of videos, which are extremely interesting from internal CNP meetings. And also documented.net has published material that's related, it's overlapping. And so, boy howdy, you can see a lot of activities going on in these videos, including media operations, methods of challenging the vote on a state level, and one of my least favorite, which is COVID disinformation, which has been presented as a project at a Council for National Policy meeting.
I've been on the mailing list of FreedomWorks for years, I mean, going back to the Tea Party, and I've been getting starting in mid-April, right after all these reports came out that the majority of people dying from COVID were African American or Hispanic rather than white people, proportionate to the population. Suddenly there was all this stuff from FreedomWorks about, we got to open the economy, get back to work, come on, now. To what extent is the Koch network, which kicked off FreedomWorks to start the Tea Party, to what extent are they connected to the Council for National Policy? By the way, we've got about 45 seconds till we hit another break here.
Okay, Adam Brandon, who runs FreedomWorks, is on the executive committee of the Council for National Policy Action organization, which is their lobbying arm. So it's directly connected. The Koch brothers overlap, but not 100%.
Wow. And what about Alec? You mentioned Alec earlier.
Alec is in for the count. Very active. The head of Alec is a very active member of the Council for National Policy, and there's a lot of interaction among them and the Republican Attorneys General Association, RAGA. All of it pushing things on the state level.
Ann, can you fill us in a little more about how the Council for National Policy operates at the state level? I know, Alec is a nationwide organization. They bring in state legislators to sit with lobbyists and work things out. In fact, we had Congressman Mark Pocan, a Democrat from Wisconsin, on this program, it seems like 6-8 years ago, as he was crashing an Alec meeting and being dragged out. We discovered a Democrat or a liberal. But there's also there are state networks as well. There are discrete ones, in each state, and then there is a network of these. Is there not? And to what extent are these associated with the Council for National Policy?
Well, all I can say is that the heads of ALEC, as well as the state policy network, are very active members of the Council for National Policy. So again, this is a matter of coordination. And I've been studying it now for a few years, and I have friends who are prominent attorneys, and what they have explained to me is that some states have weaker legal systems than others, and I'm afraid that includes my home state of Oklahoma. So what you can do in those cases is propose state legislation, and for example, it might be about abortion, or it has been about abortion. Or it might be about compromising the civil and political rights of the LGBT population, which has happened in various states, including Texas. And you get these laws passed, and then you get them replicated across state lines to friendly Republican states. You test them in the courts of states where they're going to have a good chance of being validated. And then you keep leveraging up and up the system and getting this kind of creep of erosion of our political and civil rights state by state. And of course, part of the strategy has been to plant their supporters in the federal judiciary, and that has been happening under the Trump administration apace. A record number of their supporters planted in the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. So their stated goal is to remake American society in their image, which is not remotely the image of the American citizenry as it exists today.
Yeah, you mentioned de Tocqueville in your book at one point. His understanding of American society was quite different than theirs, it seems.
Yeah, I think that, for me, and I've studied a fair amount of American history, the beauty of the American idea is that this country was founded at a time when people were killing each other over religion in Europe and in England. And so the founders came to, their families came to the United States and looked for a way to live and let live. You practice your religion, whatever it is, as long as it doesn't encroach on me. And that is, in fact, what has happened. And as we've progressed as a nation, that idea of inclusion and tolerance has expanded as well.
In summary, it seems, what we have here with the Council for National Policy is a group devoted to establishing and then, once established, maintaining oligarchy in the United States. Would that be an overstatement?
I think so. And it's got two big components. One is the religious and social. So again, it's rolling back civil and political rights for a lot of Americans, women, LGBT, minorities, immigrants, etc. These are not to be equal citizens. The other part is all about the money. I'm convinced of it. You've got the DeVos family, which doesn't like investigations by the government of their business malpractice. You've got the Koch brothers who don't like environmental regulations that stop them from polluting our rivers and our air and our soil. And so they want to dismantle the government as something that stands in their way. And they also don't want to pay any taxes. And they especially don't want to pay any taxes that benefit anybody else, whether it's children, whether it's impoverished people, whether it's elders. So that means eroding and eventually eliminating social programs and the government agencies that administer them. And it sounds extreme, but my book has 1,000 footnotes. I think I've documented it thoroughly. It is harsh.
Yeah, you've certainly convinced me. This is like full-bore oligarchy. So, which raises the question: if Donald Trump, through his, I would say probably character flaws more than anything else, because I think that if he had handled the coronavirus appropriately, he would probably be cruising to re-election right now. But if he loses terribly and the Senate is lost and the House is retained by Democrats, how is the Council for National Policy going to respond to this? Is this just another opportunity to go hard like they did against like they did against Bill Clinton and Barack Obama with their radio and media networks and everything else? I mean, what kind of response do you expect?
Well, they've floated a lot of ideas at their meetings, which we've just recently gotten access to, and they floated the idea of having Navy SEAL veterans helping to guard the polling places in urban areas. So they have looked at a lot of different approaches to voter suppression and discrediting the vote. In a recent meeting, they met with the Republican attorneys general to see if they can have state-level means of challenging the vote. And then I think, and again, I can't answer this definitively. I'm reading the tea leaves. But I think the whole purpose of packing the courts in the way that they've done is to mount every possible loophole, bizarre legal challenge that they can to thwart the will of the people.
And I asked you earlier why these people are doing this, and you just talked about, wanting less regulation, wanting more money. We talked about neo-Calvinism. Is there beyond those things, kind of a divine right to rule? Is there a governing philosophy here?
Well, Tom, I'm somebody with a foot in each culture. I go back to Oklahoma a few times a year. I've lived in New York City. And I do feel that there is a kind of regional resentment. Basically, nobody of importance in this group is from New York or Boston, right? It's like this regional resentment where they want to take back what they think is theirs. I do feel that there's a little macho element because it is a very male-dominated culture, even though there are prominent women in it. But, for example, Phyllis Schlafly was one of the founding members, and her organization is still very active in it.
She was a regular on this show, by the way. I used to debate her all the time.
Okay. You know whereof I speak.
Yes.
And I think that it's very interesting to trace that path from Phyllis Schlafly through Amy Coney Barrett and this whole idea that women achieve prominence by arguing for the domination over other women. I find that very problematic.
Yeah, and kind of breathtaking. So to summarize, because we're running out of time here, your book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. And we're talking about the Council for National Policy. What can we do about this?
Well, if Trump and the Republicans take the government in the election, very little. Right. And if they don't, we need to rethink, starting with the IRS and going on to creating media systems that really serve